By the way, how did the soldiers manage to survive against such a concentrated explosion? John asked. They were using one of our experimental technologies known as the C-Kinetic Shield Mk2, Aaron answered as he materialized something that appeared like a thick smartphone and handed it to John, who was immediately shown the details of its technology. Model information. Name: C-Kinetic Shield Mk2, testing version. Size: compact, smartphone thickness. Purpose: prototype testing and evaluation. Power source: monocharge. Status: 85% backup power, none. Shield strength: energy absorption rate, 75%, variable. Regeneration rate. Testing coverage area, partial protection. Status check: shield activation. Testing tactical mode, engaged. Adaptive deflection. Testing overload protection, unstable. Features: kinetic absorption, limited test data. Particle barrier, experimental field. Mobility enhancer. Test enhancements. Reactive adaptation, ongoing evaluation. Maintenance, health status, under evaluation. Self-diagnostic, in progress. Service required. Frequent updates. Note: the C-Kinetic Shield Mk2 is currently in the testing phase. It is not completely operational and its performance is subject to the ongoing evaluation. Use it with extreme caution, as there is a possibility that it may not provide complete protection in all situations. It should be ready for real combat use in a few real-world months after a version ready for military use is completed. Aaron finished his explanation while he gave John enough time to read through the description of the device. When it is officially ready for combat use, it will be a revolutionary tech and might make it almost impossible to lose a fight when someone has this on. John muttered in excitement as he imagined how it would be like when going full haywire on a group of enemies with this type of shield on him, which will allow him to fight without any fear of death. As long as it has enough energy to sustain the fight, Aaron added after seeing the expression on John's face, knowing exactly what he was thinking. How long can the energy last when the final version is on rollout? John asked, curious about for how long this shield would be able to protect the soldiers. As long as it is not shot upon, the energy will only be depleted after a month of the shield being in a constant active state. However, that is for standby. Every time the shield is forced to block a projectile, the energy will be depleted, and the more powerful the thing that hits the shield is, the more energy will be drawn from the power source. So, it might last, maybe a full day of constant combat, Aaron explained. That still gives enough time for the soldiers to deal heavy damage to the enemies, John remarked upon hearing Aaron's answer. Yes, but it won't be carried separately by the soldiers. It will be stored inside the soldier's kinetic skeleton, Aaron added. John nodded his head, understanding that having it come integrated with the kinetic skeleton would ensure that it remained in a place where falling due to some mistake would be almost impossible when compared to if the soldiers were to carry it themselves. Then what about the artillery that shot down the bombers? John asked, recalling how the intimidating bombers were shot down by artillery fire instead of missiles. Those came from an electromagnetic railgun from an island located 150 kilometers away from the battlefield, Aaron answered as he showed John the footage of the railguns turning and firing in a sync, having the shells fly the whole distance of more than 100 kilometers in a matter of 3 seconds before downing the bomber fleets. John's eyes almost popped out of their sockets in astonishment after hearing that the distance from the bombers and the time it had taken for the projectiles to reach and hack down the bombers. His mind was envisioning having the country covered with these systems, creating a shell coverage, allowing it to stop anything from entering the country's airspace without permission. Aaron continued to show him the different weapons within the warehouse, almost causing the general to lose his life by a heart attack since he couldn't get used to the advanced technology that he was being continuously shown, and with each item that passed, the next would have an even higher level of novelty. Having at least one of such advanced weapons was the dream of every military. However, Aaron had all of them stored in a massive warehouse where they were waiting for their need to rise. At Aaron's house in America. What can we help you with? Donald, the head of security at Aaron's house, asked the two men wearing vests and hats with a logo he recognized from the local electric utility company as they tried to enter the compound of the house. We have been sent from the company to investigate the source of the energy usage spike that had occurred a few days ago from this house, answered one of the men as he rummaged through the bag on his back after setting the toolbox in his hand down. Here are our credentials and the order from the company for the checkup we are supposed to conduct in this house, said the man after finding the necessary documents from his bag. Donald took the documents and read them carefully, not skimping on anything on the documents before taking out his phone and calling the utility company's customer service. When they answered the call, he asked them if there was a scheduled checkup on the house and provided them with the address so that they could verify it in their systems. After receiving a positive answer from them, Donald allowed the two to enter the fence as he escorted them to the front door of the house where rang the doorbell and waited with them for a response. The doorbell's ring echoed throughout the house, prompting Rose, Aaron's mother, to get from the sofa and head to the door to see who it was. The door's surveillance feed displayed Donald and two people whom she didn't recognize. The two were wearing hats and vests which had a symbol she recognized as belonging to the local electric utility company. Pressing on the microphone button, she asked, "Donald, is there a problem?" "No ma'am. They're from the utility company and were sent to take a look at the cause of the power consumption surge that occurred a few days ago," Donald reported immediately after he was asked. "There was a power surge in the house?" Rose murmured, quite surprised by such an anomaly having occurred in the house without her being unaware of it. "It seems so, ma'am. That's why they came to check if there is something wrong with the wiring and to see if it is dangerous to those occupying the house," Donald explained. "Come in," Rose said as she immediately pressed the button to open the door, not wanting to waste any time since she was worried there might still be some potential danger. "Sorry for the disturbance, ma'am," the two men said after entering the house. "No worries," Rose replied, her eyes turning to the side as Michael, Aaron's father, came after noticing his wife raising her voice slightly out of nervousness. "Where is the distribution panel?" the utility worker asked moments after Rose explained the whole ordeal to Michael. "It is in the basement. Donald can take you there," Michael answered, prompting Donald to take further action, understanding the underlying meaning behind Aaron's father's words. This meant that Donald needed to keep an eye on them as Michael knew that the basement was the place where his son's impromptu server or something was stored, which resulted in Aaron spending most of his time there. "I will lead the way," Donald said, taking off his shoes and wearing slippers, giving the two men slippers to wear too before he guided them down the stairs, heading to the basement. "What is the analysis saying, Aubrey?" Morgan's family head inquired to the slightly trembling presenter who was overly nervous, which was in stark contrast to his confident demeanor during the previous conference where he had given an idea that had earned him praise from Aubrey. "Why are you quiet? Do you want to piss me off?" George, the family head's favorite son, asked, confidence evident in his voice and personality since he had been the favorite son after he had been successful in executing the attack on the Rothschilds and inflicting heavy damages on them. "The thing is, the suspected individual seems to be in the process of dumping billions into the country, pumping the economy with large amounts of dollars in the country and increasing the confidence in investors, reducing the chances of the economy collapsing to a lesser degree than what we had previously calculated." He paused to take a breath as his heart was almost trying to jump from his chest from all the nervousness. "To what percent does it fall?" George asked, narrowing his eyes. "It fell from a 96% certainty to 34% and is still continuously falling. If the trend continues this way, not only will it reduce the bankruptcy chances to zero, the economy itself will start raising and recovering from the damage, which will be quite detrimental to us," explained the man. "That's not good," one of the board members remarked upon hearing the alarming fall of numbers. "Anyways, can we stop it from continuing to fall?" asked another board member, his face indicating his reluctance to lose this chance, since he had managed to gather a pretty large chunk of money and planned to double it by buying assets at a cheaper price after the country went bankrupt. "Well, we could start by pressuring the American government to prevent the company from being allowed to do the complete transfer process, which will force a large chunk of their funds to remain in America and can't be used in the process of helping the Eden's economy. However, that would most likely result in him selling the company and cashing out his money. And even if he doesn't choose that option, it is very unlikely that he will face a money crunch," explained the presenter. "What do you mean by that?" asked Aubrey, even though he had his own suspicions. "From our investigation in finding out who had taken the second most wins, we have come to the conclusion that he is the most likely winner, coming second behind us," answered the presenter. "But how did he manage to avoid being discovered by us for such a long time, and how did he even know of our plans?" asked George. His face was expressing curiosity, as he was certain that the plan was kept under a high level of secrecy, through which even the moles of the Rothschild family couldn't get a whiff of, allowing them to be inflicted by such heavy damages. Although we don't know exactly how he got to know about it, we suspect that he has a program that, by the 5th minute of the crash, managed to deduce that it was a flash crash and the market was bound to return back to normal when the circuit breaker was activated. He chose to use thousands of burner accounts to massively profit from it, before becoming the second beneficiary of our attack. The presenter paused for a moment trying to catch a breath before continuing. As for how the program knew that, the highest likelihood comes from it being a result of machine learning, similar to how they reported his company's AI work. If he can create such a sophisticated program to work on such small devices, what are the chances that he has one that uses his company's data center as its computer for learning and helping him in things like financial speculations? As for how sure we are, we conducted an investigation and found that all of the company's programs, both the Bug Zapper and the Gaia OS, are using Amazon's servers for their online services, which leaves behind the 200 million data centers with no other use for the company other than what we speculated. When the Morgan's family head heard the reasoning, he couldn't help but be convinced. He raised his head, which had been resting on his hand's support under his chin, and said, "So what are the other remaining suggestions that can bring back the chances of the country's collapsing economy once again to the 90%, other than blocking his company's moving there, as it seems that there is powerful backer helping him with that?" he asked. "Although we can't block his cash which is entering the country, we can employ a measure that will make others who had brought their money to the country and were planning on investing it to earn massive profits have no choice but withdraw their investments and escape with their cash," the presenter said. This time, his nervousness and worry had completely disappeared and his once lost confidence was regained when he found out that Aubrey and his son didn't choose to punish him for the miscalculations on his previous plan that almost resulted in them losing a fat meat which was almost ready for their eating. "And what is that plan?" asked George in a tone which indicated that he was now getting annoyed at being put in suspense, which immediately knocked the regained confidence of the presenter off the window, making him realize that he had messed up. Immediately reflecting on himself, he coughed and said, "Using Hesperia as the chess piece for our plan to scare the investors." "Ooh, I see where you are going with the idea," George said and added, "Are you planning on making them attack Eden through the borders where both sides have been amassing forces for the past 2 months?" he asked, speculating what the plans were about. "Yes, that is the very plan. And since there were already tensions between them due to Hesperia blocking access to their ports and confiscating the imports for Eden, it won't be something that no one expected and they won't be suspecting someone else to be behind this either," added the presenter. Good. This will reduce their already lower credit rating in the world and make many people hesitant on lending them money since there is no chance of them being able to pay back. It will also make the hyenas leave the country since they aren't sure of the new forces that have replaced the weak military but still absorb the former soldiers' ability to win the fight, which risks the country falling and them losing their investment. "A genius, really genius move," the George said, feeling satisfied with the plan they had come up with. Aubrey, thinking a little further, asked, "Is this the best plan where we will be benefiting no matter the outcome?" "Yes, sir. If Hesperia wins the war and ends up taking over Eden, since we are the ones financing them, we will be the first to choose the spoils of war. And if they end up negotiating a deal, we will delay it as far as possible until all of the money in the country flees while also devaluing the currency for the most benefits," answered the presenter, showing that they really had thought this for much longer. "Good, then you are heading to Hesperia tomorrow and have a meeting with their president. Make sure you return with an agreement from them. Money shouldn't be a problem. Tell him we can arrange clean money for him in an offshore account where he can use it at any moment he wants without having to worry about any of it implicating him negatively," said Aubrey, his tone carrying a hint of satisfaction with the way they had come up, which will allow them to, for sure, receive the largest share of the country when everything came to a conclusion. A real-world day has passed since Aaron had started showing John the weapons in the warehouse, meaning a total of 15 days have passed in the Universal simulation already. During this period, Aaron had demonstrated to John everything that was in the warehouse and even the experimental ones that were still under the process of research. This was then followed by him taking the soldiers to where they would be receiving their training after Aaron called for them. Meanwhile, Nova, who had just finished decorating and furnishing the building, shifted her focus to the decoration of the surroundings of the building. She started doing so by building a large parking lot, immediately followed by building a massive park surrounding the building, ensuring that the atmosphere surrounding the building doesn't appear to be mismatched, destroying its beauty. She also followed by starting to build infrastructure leading to the building, since one of the pipeline digging and one pipeline printing machine had also been working diligently as they were building a massive pipeline extending for kilometers, reaching to the ocean and connecting the building to the abundant water source. Before the water was sent through the pipelines, the ocean water passed through a printer of sorts which wasted no time in removing all the salts and other impurities present in the water, and then the filtered and pure water was sent down the pipeline, to be used by the facilities for their needs. At the same time, the machine was also collecting and storing the deuterium atoms, which were retrieved and transported to the reactor after the atomic storage tank became full to be used as fuel for the fusion reactor. Tritium, on the other hand, was continuously being produced within the reactor through the interaction of neutrons with lithium, so it could be said that the future energy needs of the facility were being met by using the ocean. Not stopping there with just the infrastructure projects, Nova moved on to construct a road which will be connecting different parts of the island. And instead of using the method of printing asphalt, she was employing a revolutionary method that could be considered almost magical. The printer-like road-making machine was disintegrating the sand below it and rearranging the atoms in a robust and rigid lattice structure. By arranging the silicon and oxygen atoms found in sand in a diamond-like lattice for the first layer, Nova was creating a highly robust and strong structure. And since the machine was not just printing one layer, each layer was employed with a different means of strengthening the road in different ways. With the first layer of the sand molecules, oxygen and silicon, being arranged in a diamond-like lattice structure, the layer following that was arranged in a hexagonal close-packed, HCP, structure, where atoms were formed in a tightly packed layer in a hexagonal pattern. By using this configuration, Nova maximized the strength of the atomic bonds. The following layer was made using nanosheet formation, where nanosheets made of silicon dioxide were incorporated to provide additional strength and flexibility to the road, allowing the material to be able to withstand bending and deformation. The layer after that added structural reinforcements, introducing structural reinforcements, such as dislocations or impurity atoms, to strengthen the material and prevent crack propagation. If that could even happen. With all these meticulous processes, different layers were being used to make one thick material and were continuously printed on top of each other until a half-meter deep structure was materialized, taking its rightful place on the now strengthened ground. Although the process might seem to have taken a long time for printing, the whole process had been done within microseconds, allowing the machine to print a 20-meter wide road with a length of 10 meters in a matter of 10 seconds. And with about 10 more machines of about 15 meters in length working along the first machine's side, printing another road simultaneously for all the different directions, the entire island was becoming the first place to witness and receive the honor of having its atoms being disintegrated and rejoined to create a novel material that was deemed too good to be used as a road surface. Thus, the world's hardest, strongest, and most flexible road, destined to last for centuries without damage, was born. A middle finger to the Romans' road engineers. A similar but different thing was happening on the center of the wide roads that were being printed. A railway was being printed on the empty middle space heading wherever the road was heading. However, Nova didn't stop with just the construction of the road and the rail network. A new batch of machines that had been driving for about half an hour finally arrived at the makeshift port that was being guarded by the Ares members with guns in their possessions. A few speedboats could also be seen to be patrolling from a distance, making sure that no one is able to approach the island, as the knowledge of whatever was being created on the island could potentially plunge the world into chaos. The machines didn't even pause for a second as 10 of them continued driving, entering the water as if they were a malfunctioning Tesla's autopilot. Slowly but surely, the machines started disappearing into the water, but even if that was happening right in front of them, none of the Ares soldiers did anything to stop the machines. The other 10 machines that were left behind by those that tried to commit suicide by water, took no short than a few seconds to scan the whole makeshift port before immediately starting to disintegrate everything that could be seen on the port. The soldier had already received orders to retreat to a far distance and watched at the sight before their eyes in horror, as how everything that once excited, wasn't anymore, vanishing as if it were a mirage, remaining as only memories of these soldiers as a proof of their existence. Being soldiers, they couldn't help but imagine what would happen if there ever comes a day when this technology would be used as a weapon. How could they even try fighting it? The machines on the surface, not caring about the spectators, continued their work, working in tandem with the ones that went under the water as they started deepening the depth of the port to a massive depth of 70 meters, immediately breaking the record for the world's deepest port by over 4 times. This depth extended for more than a kilometer parallel to the shore, clearly showing that they were planning on making the initial port about a kilometer in length. Now that the disintegration process was completed, it was immediately followed by the machines starting the printtraction of the port. Part by part, slowly but surely, the port was coming to life. All of this happened in front of the eyes of the soldiers, who would never be able to forget this day of their life, knowing that this was merely the beginning of their bizarre adventures, as long as they continue working for Aaron, if you ignore the fact of them being healed by him before. Throughout the entirety of this ordeal, from Nova starting the construction of the massive building in tandem with the building on top of the fusion reactor, the construction of the water pipeline and the super strong road, Aaron remained unmoving on his reclining beach chair with an umbrella protecting him from the sun and a thin veil of sheet covering his body, making him appear as if he was calmly sleeping while having a nice dream. Meanwhile, in a meeting room, "So, what did you find, James Comey, the FBI director?" asked the 2 men standing in front of the long meeting room table of high-ranking officials in the bureau. "Sir, in his basement, there is a server that seems to not have been upgraded since the time he bought it. And although its power consumption was minimal, it was still indicated that it was actively being used. Also, there was something else that was consuming enough power than what the entire house does. Nothing comes to my mind that would cause such a machine to gobble such a high amount of electricity while maintaining abnormal silence," reported one of the men, and not much surprisingly, he was the one who had visited and inspected Aaron's house under the guise of being an inspector from the power utility company. "Did you manage to take a look at it?" asked Lisa Page, the FBI attorney. "No, madam. There was a guard accompanying us throughout the whole process," answered the second man. "So, this means that you failed to plant anything into the house that could provide us with continuous information from that household?" James asked, pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. "Unfortunately, that's true," replied one of them. "Now that it's out of the question, does anyone have an idea on how we can gather information from him that would be helpful enough to allow the president to have enough power to stop him from moving his company?" James inquired, his stress visibly increasing. "How about his friends?" one of the high-ranking members in the meeting room suggested. Most of them had abandoned him after he was expelled from the university, and despite their attempts to reconnect with him, he ignored every single one of them, which leaves behind only 2 of his friends, Sarah and Felix. However, Felix is with him in Eden, while Sarah is the one who is responsible for moving the company, so we won't be getting anything from her either, Lana, a high-ranking member in the bureau, answered, striking the option down while also making them know that she knew enough about Aaron. "Any other suggestions?" James added after hearing a response. One of the 2 standing men raised his hand, asking for permission to speak. James took a look around the table, and seeing that there was no one who had a suggestion to give, he turned to the man and nodded, giving him the permission to speak. "Since we've already started with our operation, why don't we continue with it?" he said, and paused to see if he would be permitted to continue or if they were going to shut down his idea as soon as it began. Seeing that no one interrupted him, he continued his suggestion. "From the manual I read during our preparation of inspecting his house, I remember reading a document about the electrical code violations." He paused for a moment, trying to remember the details as much as possible before he continued. "There is a part in the document that stated that after the inspection, if the cause of the problem is deemed to be a significant public safety risk, authorities might need to take immediate action to address the issue, such as temporarily disconnecting the machine or cordoning off the property until the hazards are resolved." He looked around at the people in the room before continuing. "We can use this guise of public safety to cordon off his properties and have about a few days to inspect the servers in his house, since most of the sensitive information should be there. The few days that we gain until his lawyers can force the court to make us leave his property should be enough for us to download all of the data in his home server for later analysis. We can also plant bugs in the house though I'm afraid that he might do a bug sweep on the whole house after we are forced to vacate the house. In the court, our lawyers can argue that the vacating of the compound can only be obliged under the condition that we are allowed to take the machine that caused the power surge for inspection to avoid risking harm to the public. This gives us the ability to confiscate that strange machine and see if it is the stated, state-of-the-art, computer that has been giving us a headache when we tried to decrypt the data we intercepted from his house through the fiber optic nodes. He finished his explanation for the plan he had come up with, perusing the room to see if they would agree to his suggested plan. And when he saw their expressions, he knew that he had hit the jackpot, while a smile could be seen on James' face, indicating his satisfaction with the plan. "That's a very good plan," James Comey nodded, the smile still gracing his face since he couldn't find any notable hole in it, but just in case, he turned to Lisa Page, the FBI attorney, and asked, "Is it feasible?" Though there needs to be some polishing, it is indeed a good plan. Although he might suspect that it was he can't prove it unless he has some connection to the higher-ups. Which he doesn't, she answered, causing the smile on James's face to widen even more. Shortly after, John said, "Since you came up with this plan, you will be the leader of the operation. Work with Lisa to polish the plan and choose anyone you want to be on your team. Whatever happens, just make sure that you have the data from his servers and that strange box back to the headquarters by the time the court forces us to evict the building, understood?" "Yes, sir," the man answered with an excited smile on his face since his idea was accepted and now he was even allowed to lead the operation by himself. "What's your name again?" James Comey asked, this time genuinely wanting to know the man's name since he had previously seen it on a document about the operation but didn't give it much of an importance, resulting in him forgetting it. "My name is Peter Strzok," answered the man. "Peter Strzok, keep up the good work," James nodded, raising from his chair and patting his shoulder as he walked out of the room. "Yes, sir," Peter answered before turning to Lisa Page, smiling at her, trying to make a good impression since they would be working together in the upcoming days. "Nice to meet you," he greeted. "Nice to meet you too," Lisa Page replied, reciprocating the smile he gave her. For those who know them, slightly smiling face. "Welcome back, sir," Nova greeted Aaron, appearing in front of him in her augmented reality form the moment Aaron opened his eyes after logging off the VR, having just finished his meeting with John just moments ago. "It looks like you really went all out," Aaron said after he opened his eyes and could see the side of the building rising 100 or so meters in height, its length resembling a Titan wall. "I decided to start earlier to make sure that no problem occurs midway and causes delays to the project," Nova reported. "What do you mean by that?" Aaron asked, quite puzzled. "Based on my calculations using the variables and datasets that I have access to, it shows that there is a high chance that Hesperia will escalate its actions, either due to either external influence or internal factors," she explained to the now completely focused Aaron, who after hearing this report had lost any curiosity about the building behind him or about any of the other infrastructure that was still ongoing the contraction process. "What timelines are we operating on?" Aaron asked immediately. "It depends on variables in action here, some of them even are projecting no less than 2 weeks, while some of the others project that it will take no less than a month before the first shot is fired," she clarified. "That's enough time to have a first batch of graduates," Aaron said, releasing a sigh of relief realizing that he had sufficient time to prepare himself. "Also, while you were having a tour with John, through the CCTV network you built into the neighborhood, I discovered 2 people heading to your house. They did some inspections on the electric wiring network. After accessing the security database about the 2 people's visit, I found information about them that Donald had uploaded to the house's security team's database, showing a picture of their credentials. When I hacked into the listed company and got my hands on their employees' details, I found that it seems to have been registered just a few days ago. However, the documents were very skillfully edited to make it look like they had been working for 5 years. Nova took a break and finally came to a conclusion. Anyone who looked through their documents would think that they really had been working for the company for a few years, she reported and explained what she found. "FBI?" Aaron muttered with a frown after hearing the explanations while touching his forehead. "Yes," Nova answered bluntly with a single word, not sugarcoating anything at all despite knowing that Aaron hated this name the most, second only to the hate he had once had for Rodham. "Looks like I need to buy a school," Aaron said in a dry tone, not joking in the least. Upon hearing that, Nova's servers immediately got to work to analyze the reason behind such a statement from him. School for who? Henry. As he was the only one in their family going to school, she thought, procession the information. Where is the school going to be? Of course, Eden. Meaning that Henry will have to move to Eden, she continued to deduce. Adding a few more queries and answering them herself, Nova finally found the most likely reason behind Aaron's words to be answered that way. You plan to use this incident as a way to convince your parents to move to Eden? She asked. Yes, Aaron replied with a smile on his face. Should I send a few of the remaining Ares personnel to America to move the quantum computer? I'm more than 97% sure that they will return with one of the more than 530,867 legal ways with which they could get their hands on the quantum computer, Nova suggested. No, leave it there. It is better if they take it. No, I very much hope that they do it, Aaron muttered, the corner of his lips curving into a sinister smile. Seeing that smile on his face, Nova knew either the FBI was in for a treat or the entire US government was about to learn a very valuable lesson the hard way. Among her variables, Nova considered the task the quantum computer at his home had been doing after she migrated to the quantum server: data transfer. Are you planning to let them have it so that you can have access to their classified network? Nova asked after a moment. Yes, it's like killing two birds with one stone, Aaron answered. Although I could have convinced my parents to move here peacefully, they would still entertain the idea of returning to America whenever they want. But if they were to see how the government treats me, they will also have the same feeling as I do. And after they move here, their nostalgia for America should gradually subside, Aaron answered by explaining, giving Nova another reason as to why he wanted the quantum computer to be taken. Still, order the Ares members living in the surrounding buildings of my family's house to be on standby, just in case if something or someone tries to harm them during the period where I wait for the three-letter agency to make their move, Aaron ordered, asking for an increase of scrutiny of the Ares members that were living as normal people in nearly half the houses around his family's neighborhood. Yes, sir. With the access to the entire CCTV network that you had built in the neighborhood, it's impossible for something to pass through without me noticing and informing them at once, Nova answered, assuring Aaron, alleviating his worries. Good. Let's tour the building during that time, Aaron said, rising from the beach chair he had been seated on throughout the time he had been talking to the AR of Nova through the glasses. As he toured the lowermost floor of the building, Aaron couldn't help but smile with satisfaction when he noticed that the pods were arranged in quadruple deckers, covering the entire floor with well-managed pipes coming from them, yet not destroying the beautiful arrangements. How many of them are here? He asked. The floor has 10,000 pods, and since they are in quadruple deckers, meaning there are 3 more on top of each pod on the floor separated by a space of a meter, it means there are 40,000 of them, she answered. Tell John to start increasing the recruitment of the soldiers since we can now accommodate 40,000 of them here for training at once. There is no need to waste the resources and leave them inactive, Aaron instructed. Done. The next day. Oh my God, what the heck happened here? Gasped one of the 50 Ares soldiers who had been sent the next day, responding to Aaron's order for them to come so that they could receive their training earlier than the rest of the soldiers who were scheduled to arrive by the next week. And as the rest of the occupants disembarked from the messy boat, they noticed the massive new port which the soldiers knew didn't exist before, since some of them in this batch had helped in transferring the first batch of the materials to the island when Aaron was about to start the construction of the fusion reactor. The port looked new and futuristic, and though empty, it still commanded respect since it was built differently than any other usual port. It was a hybrid port for both the civilian and military vessels to dock on it without needing any specialized modifications. Faced with the size of the port the boat those soldiers were in felt out of place, finding itself in a situation where you take off your shoes in a house where everyone enters with their on them. When they got off the boat after it was docked on the dock specifically made for small boats, they met with a few fellow members of Ares who had been on the island throughout its construction, helping Aaron in quite a few things and had the honor of witnessing the miracles happening everywhere on the island during the past few months. What happened here? One of the newcomers asked their fellow who was welcoming them on the port. I will explain it on the way. "We're operating on a tight schedule," said the welcoming companion, and before he immediately started jogging, prompting the newcomers to start jogging behind him as well. "The longer I'm on this island, the more questions I have," remarked one of the newcomers as they jogged behind their escort until he noticed the 200-meter-long train waiting for them. "Get in!" the escort shouted, and the train's doors automatically opened as if waiting for them to get in. One by one, the Aries members boarded the train, finding themselves inside a very luxurious train, which was a first-time experience for many of them. Taking their seat, the door automatically closed, followed by the train starting to move very smoothly, devoid of any friction. It was as if they were floating, which was also true since the train was electromagnetically propelled. The journey took less than a minute, and the soldiers' eyes widened as they beheld the massive building and developed infrastructure in the vicinity of the city. A few seconds later, the train finally came to a full stop a few meters away from a door made specifically for the entry to allow those arriving by the train so that they could access the building with it. One by one, they got off and passed through the door, finding a waiting room on the other side, respectfully taking their seats as soon as possible and started waiting for the following instructions. "Let's start, shall we?" Aaron said as he observed the feet of the soldiers sitting in the waiting room, all showing a military demeanor, quiet and serious expressions on their faces. "Yes," Nova responded and immediately released a sleeping gas in the room. The gas was subtle enough that the soldiers only realized that something was wrong only when they started to faint. The moment they fainted, the native Aries members, who had been inside the island since the beginning, entered the room with a fleet of autonomous vehicles. They then started gently placing the soldiers inside the vehicles before they started leaving and headed to the massive elevator in the building, heading to the lowest floor of the building. Upon their arrival under the floor, the unconscious soldiers were moved to the furthest pods where another native Aries member awaited, supervising the machine. The machine carefully lifted a soldier, raising him to the highest pod, and then placed the soldier in the pod. And now that the soldier was inside the pod, the native Aries member near the machine put the soldier in a more comfortable position, making sure that his whole body was in the pod before pressing the button, causing the pod to close before releasing a low hum as it released a golden light inside, which started scanning and mapping every atom in the soldier inside the pod and rebuilding and analyzing his body, which was then immediately followed by the optimization of the pod to the specifications of the soldier present in it. The same process was repeated for all the 50 soldiers who arrived here by the train and were now inside the pods. Upon completing their placement into the pods, all the soldiers in the pods were simultaneously injected with a needle inside the pod, which granted the pod access to their bodies. Using this needle as an access, a strange-looking liquid was injected into them. The amount varied for each soldier since they were being given the exact sufficient amount that was best suited for them. The liquid immediately started reaching every part of the soldiers' bodies. Everywhere the blood could pass, the strange liquid also made its way, leaving a small part of itself along the way, including the brains of these soldiers. At the moment, the liquid did nothing to their bodies, similar to the first time when Aaron had assimilated with the system. "Attention!" a voice commanded, reverberating inside a stadium as the group of 50 soldiers responded instinctively and arranged themselves into 5 lines, consisting of 10 people each before they could even think of how the heck did they arrive there. "Where the heck are we?" they wondered to themselves silently, still remaining in their attentive position since the last memory they have was about them waiting for a visit with their general, Aaron, which indicated that whatever had happened to them had very likely something to do with him. "I'm Athena and I will be responsible for your retraining. If you have any questions, ask them now," Athena introduced herself, materializing in front of the soldier, scaring the shit out of them. However, they still managed to maintain their position. Among the 50 men, 18 of them raised their hands to ask their questions. "Ask them at once and I will answer them," Athena said, and following her orders, the latter asked her their questions at once. "Where are we? How did we get here? Who are you? Can you introduce yourself? You are inside the VR. As for your real bodies, they are inside a pod within the massive building that you had seen and are under the protection of Sir Aaron. So don't worry about anything else and focus on your retraining," Athena began, answering all of their questions in one swift motion. "I understand that my answer might have given rise to some new questions for you, so let me answer them immediately, not wasting both of our time. Your bodies have been injected with genetic enhancers specifically tailored according to each of your bodies and would help in enhancing your genetics and increase your body power, coordination, speed and many more. However, these enhancers are inactive at the moment and the only way for you to activate them is for your body to undergo the exercises needed to push your body to really reach that realm. When your brain starts to imitate this in order to activate the enhancer, the enhancements will be reflected into your real bodies. Athena paused explaining for a moment, letting the soldiers digest the information she just gave them. After a moment, she continued, if it is like that, then, why are you inside the VR for the training, instead of just injecting your bodies with enhancers and letting you train in the real world? The reason is that, here I can make sure that you don't get tired to the point of dropping dead, so you will train until I tell you to stop without worrying about your bodies being harmed in the slightest. Also, in this virtual environment, you can be shot at and shoot others without dying in real life, so the training here will always be with live munitions and you will also be fighting a real war against enemies of my choosing, which will be no different from real war scenario. But, before we proceed, let's start with knowledge assimilation. As for what it is, you will understand its purpose when it is over, Athena said, and immediately all the soldiers sat down. Their bodies doing so automatically without any of them ordering their bodies to do so consciously. However, before they could even wonder how this had happened, a massive amount of knowledge began to be dumped into their mind. This included knowledge on weapons, the routine of exercises they should do in order to maximize the benefits they will be receiving from the genetic enhancements drugs. Eren wanted it to be that way so that the soldier didn't merely receive the enhanced bodies simply for joining his army, rather, he wanted them to work hard for their bodies and be rewarded exactly what they had worked for, nothing more nothing less. So, if you are lazy, you get little enhancements, and if you are a hard worker, you get the most of the enhancement serum. Now start running. I don't want to see any of you slacking around as Sir Eren is watching everything, Athena commanded the moment the knowledge assimilation was concluded. Hearing the order, the soldiers wasted no time and immediately started running towards the tracks on the stadium and started running by adopting a jogging manner, keeping a moderate speed since they knew they weren't stopping anytime soon, so preserving their stamina was important. While they were running, they were using this time to constantly think about what the heck had just happened to them moments ago, reviewing through the knowledge they were assimilated with. They were now able to remember everything about weapons and tactics, something that they had never seen before. It was as if they had been using them for decades, but in reality, they haven't seen them even once. How long is the cloud going to continue being sustained? Eren asked, turning his head up to look at the ceiling, but he was actually seeing beyond it, watching the clouds with his glasses using the sensors built into the building to show him a view of beyond the ceiling. The building had a massive sensor, the same technology that was used in the military headgear for the soldiers, but this was about 1,000 times larger in size. It helped in seeing everything that was going on the island, acting as the 3D CCTV, radar, lidar and every surveillance tech you can imagine, can be replaced by this massive sensor. No less than a week, I think it's about time you start casting the concealment rune on the building, or else you will be the talk of the world, Nova answered. I know, but at the moment I'm just stuck on how I should program the concealment rune so that it gives the impression that something has been happening without revealing the completed projects which will scare them, Eren answered with a wry smile. How about you conceal the building but leave the infrastructure visible? It would be convincing if they could see that for the past months you have built the infrastructure and with the satellite images of the atomic printer. It will be convincing for them to believe that we managed to build a warehouse over the past few months, Nova suggested. That's a good plan. Let's implement it that way, Eren agreed, returning his gaze back to the feed that displayed the soldiers still running, after which he asked, by the way, how long are they going to be running? Eren watched the soldiers who had been running for more than 15 hours in VR time, meaning that he had been watching them running for over an hour without stopping for even a second despite looking tired, while Athena didn't seem to be thinking of letting them stop anytime soon. For 5 hours of real-world time, which will be immediately followed by them moving to another training session that will last for a total of 2 real-world days before they move on to weapons training and warfare training and mock war trial as a final test, Nova explained. Athena is brutal, Eren laughed, feeling slightly sorry for the soldiers. Well, she is responsible for overseeing the military, so I had to make her think like them so that there are no misunderstandings, Nova answered, despite knowing that Aaron knew why Athena was like that. How did John react after receiving the news of Athena? Aaron inquired, wanting to know if John had any reservations about Athena's role. The moment he received the news, the two had a 10-hour meeting. In the meeting, they start by knowing about each other, followed by John asking about her jurisdictions and command level. Athena reported to him that her command level is the same as his, however, she will be spending most of her time overseeing the military in its entirety, while John will be responsible for handling the daily working of the military and every other matter with the secretary you assigned to him. Upon hearing that, John was glad since he was worried that due to him having no experience in leading such a massive group, he might be doing things in a wrong manner, and since there was no one to tell him whether he is doing it wrong, his actions might cause troubles for you. However, now all of his worries were thrown out of the window, so he was happy and no problems like infighting or power struggle against her, nor did something similar occur since he trusts you and your judgment more than he trusts himself, Nova answered, explaining Aaron with what happened during that meeting. Good. Now let's hope that Hesperia doesn't cause any troubles in the mean. Aaron stopped himself from continuing any further, realizing that he was about to invoke the forbidden spell of trouble. 2 days later, man, she is not giving us enough time to rest, complained Jeremiah as he sat down to use the little 10 minutes of rest that was given to his team as a reward for completing their last course of exercises. For the past month, Athena had done nothing other than making them train from one exercise to another, and with the training getting progressively difficult and longer with each new exercise, they were always being forced to always break the new limits that they had managed to raise due to their previous exercise. During that period, they were only given 1 hour of rest every day, and additional rest time was granted if they could impress Athena by completing a set of tasks faster than the time she had tasked them with. The moment they realized that they could gain more rest time by working harder, it resulted in them always working harder than what Athena expected. One last exercise, and if you do it well I will give you a whole day of rest, Athena announced as the soldiers rested, resulting in them rising from their places, full of enthusiasm while starting to do their last exercise of the month before they get 1 day of well-deserved rest. A few hours later, the soldiers could be seen sleeping in the barracks without any worry for the world, since it was the first long sleep they had after the past month, and these soldiers planned to use it to its fullest. However, Athena seemed to have different plans for them. Boom! A shell exploded near the barracks, jolting the soldiers immediately awake. Without asking any questions, they rushed to the weapons rack and retrieved their weapons for the first time, since they had assimilated the knowledge of these weapons into their brains a month ago. 2 soldiers picked up the military headgear and immediately put it on, powering it right after so that it could immediately gather the information in their vicinity. The data indicated that there was no one within a 3-kilometer radius around them, giving them some relief. However, that relief only stayed for a short time before their bodies immediately tensed up as the headgear warned them of a shell which had entered the 6 kilometers bubble around them. Moments later, the base again, sending debris of the shattered walls flying towards them. While one of the soldiers was keeping an eye out for any more incoming enemies and warning his comrades if a new shell was incoming them, they weren't dilly-dallying, as they were wearing their gears, and when one of them was done with gearing up, he patted the first soldier on the shoulder, taking his place as the onlooker, allowing for him to go and gear himself up. 2 minutes later, all the soldiers were now completely geared up, looking intimidating as their eyes reflected the thrill and the pent-up frustration in them, which they planned to vent on their enemies. When the 10th shell struck the building, their headgear had gathered enough data to pinpoint where the enemy's location was, and with enough accuracy, the headgear started to give them a rough direction to reach their enemy. Dividing themselves into 5 teams of 10, each team chose its own leader and started heading in different directions. By doing so, they intended to expand their bubble of information, since they were on their own and had no headquarters to provide them with any further guidance, leaving them to rely on themselves. Using their headgear's instant communication, which combined all the computing powers of the 50 headgears, making them act as one computer to increase the commuting power of the teams started to move, and the map of their surroundings was continuously being updated continuously whenever they went. Among the 5 teams, the most vigilant one was heading into the direction through which the artillery had been coming from. After walking for about 20 kilometers, their headgear finally started revealing them a heavily guarded enemy base. With the rest of the teams not finding anything notable during their 20-kilometer walks, they decided to regroup with their fellow soldiers before they made their move and launched their attack on the base. An hour later, they finally recollected themselves and came up with the plan, which wasn't difficult at all since they were able to see everything that was in the enemy base, allowing them to have a whole map of the base including the position of the people within it. And after forming a relatively easy plan, they started executing their moves. Using the advantages of their weapons having a longer standoff distance to their favor, they initiated their attack while they were still 3 kilometers away from the base. One by one, the soldiers inside the base started accidentally dying with the assistance of a metal object which entered their bodies, which was of course, the strategic elimination carried out by the Ares members. It took the personnel on the base more than 10 minutes before they could realize that their numbers had been dwindling by a great extent since the Ares members prioritized taking out the enemies that were in places which wouldn't raise too much attention. With the realization that the alarm had been triggered, the enemy soldiers from the base tried to return fire, but they were not sure where the killers of their comrades were. With some of the soldiers in the base panicking, they started firing randomly in hopes that they would force the enemies to reveal themselves. However, the Ares members who were positioned 3 kilometers away, other than simply observing, did nothing and started picking off the panicking soldiers. After killing a few more casualties, due to some smart thinker analyzing how the killed soldiers fell and knowing the general direction of where the bullets came from, the enemy soldiers finally discovered Ares soldiers' direction was finally discovered. This massacre continued, with the soldiers in the base desperately trying to locate where their attackers were as the Ares members flawlessly executed their plan, reducing the number of their enemies until only the commander of the base was the one who remained, which was also the result of their deliberate actions before they started heading to the enemy base, walking and capturing the commander. Congratulations, Athena appeared, causing the still tense soldiers to release a sigh of relief as they understood that with her appearance their test was finally over. However, wasting no time, they immediately lined up and saluted her. Athena smiled and returned the salute before she announced, "Now that level 1 has been passed, let's increase the difficulty," after which she teleported them away. When the Ares soldiers opened their eyes, they found themselves in a military cargo plane that was taking them to an undisclosed location. The only thing that had changed on them was the color of the gear they were wearing, indicating that this mission was going to take place at night. While the Ares soldiers were making their way to their second test, Eren could be seen sitting at the center of the rooftop of the massive building with his eyes closed while the entire rooftop continued to glow in a golden color. Slowly but surely, the color of the rune that was covering the rooftop started to turn to white. With that, Eren stood up from the spot where he was sitting and immediately went to the elevator, which immediately took him to the ground floor. Meanwhile, Nova got to work as she started providing mana to the runes, causing them to immediately came to life, and for those who could see the building from a bird's view, they would be able to see the entire of the building had started to disappear and in its place started to appear an image of uncompleted construction of a building, making it so that whoever wanted to photograph the building from the bird's eye viewpoint would only be seeing an incomplete building that was still ongoing its construction phase. "Any tweakings that I might need to do?" Eren asked Nova to check if there were some inconsistencies in the images. "No, it looks just fine, sir," Nova reported, showing him what the satellites would be seeing if they were to look at the images of the island. It looks good," Eren nodded as he smiled with satisfaction. "Sir, John is inquiring if he should also send the trainees together with the first batch of the former soldiers. He needs to know it now so that they can start preparation right away and then begin arranging the logistics for their move," Nova informed Eren of John's request. "Yes, tell him to send them too, and also print the transportation boats which would make it easy for the transportation of the thousands of the upcoming visitors," Eren answered after giving a moment of thought. "With such a massive number of soldiers being sent to the island, won't that attract more attention?" Nova asked in concern, wanting to know if he had thought about it. "No, they will simply think that we are bringing them to expedite the construction on the island," Eren answered, showing that he had already thought through all of that, earning him a smile from Nova. "Also, the construction machines are already being transported, so it should start to speed up the progress of the construction of the airport, the railways and the ports soon," Nova reported, keeping Eren up to date on the other projects. "As for the school search, you can buy one from the few I have found, however, they still are below your stated standards, so I suggest that you just build it by yourself. Nova also reported about the task she was given for finding a good enough school for Aaron to buy. Let's not stress Felix with any more projects and postpone that until most of our big projects have come near a completion, because if I decide to build a school now, I won't be building just one, but start making a whole school chain which will allow me to train the future workers for my company personally. For now, Henry would have to be content with being homeschooled by me or going to one of the best schools you have found. The choice will be his, he answered, showing that while his ever-growing construction list continued to grow while his other projects were still not completed yet, which kept him busy, leaving no room for additional tasks at the moment. Yes, sir, Nova replied, confirming that she had already added it to Aaron's future promises lists. How is military hardware production going on? Aaron asked as he reviewed the footage of the massacre that took place earlier in a fast-forward playback. Felix has already finished the procurement of the materials and the cargo ship transporting these materials is on its way as we speak and should arrive tomorrow and drop the cargo at our port. However, using the materials that were available, I have managed to print enough equipment to sustain a 1,000-strong force, without any problem, Nova reported, informing that the production of the new weapons has come to a stop for the time being. With them, we should first build a surveying plane that would scan and map the entire country and record all of the available resources. Once that data comes to us, we can buy those locations and start extracting the materials ourselves, Aaron suggested before continuing. Given the country's size, it should have enough resources to allow us to sustain our material needs for quite a long time, Aaron said and then thought of something. If I'm not wrong, I remember that about a month ago, Felix had ordered a batch of materials for me. What happened to them? Aaron asked after he paused briefly as he remembered that there should have been one more cargo delivery that should have happened a long time ago. Esperia confiscated it during the transfer of cargo from the larger ship to smaller ones which could have docked on our ports, Nova reported. They are really getting bold, aren't they? Aaron sneered, with him now learning that they had taken his belongings by force and even kept them. He was even more eager for them to provide him with a justifiable reason to not whoop their asses. Realizing where Aaron was going with that statement, Nova suggested, it won't take too long, trying to postpone Aaron's triggered happiness for a slight longer, knowing that she couldn't change his though neither was she even planning on doing, knowing very well that kicking their asses should act as therapy for losing Bug Zapper twice, once it was stolen and once it was legally snatched, but in both times he was forced into giving it up. By the way, what are you planning on doing with the guy who shot you? Did you forgive him or do you have any other plan in mind? She asked, knowing that it would divert his attention from the Esperia discussion. Not at all, I am biding my time and by next week, with the arrival of the first batch of the 5,000 former soldiers who would also be accompanied by the 25,000 first batch of new recruits who have been receiving their training and along with them there would also be the Intelligence Department trainees. The agency's first real-world mission is going to be the apprehension of that fellow, Aaron clarified with a smile. But aren't you going to make those who sent that man take responsibility too? Nova asked further. Of course, I plan to do that as well, but that will happen after I have him and have kindly asked him to give up all the information. And if he tells the truth, his punishment might be reduced, but if he lies, I will make sure that he will regret it, Aaron confirmed with a sinister smile. At the same time, somewhere else, someone felt a shiver run down their spine while their whole body trembled. In the following few days, the massive military movement in Edenia put a slight sense of unease among the citizens of the state. Buses after buses filled with soldiers were being sent to Edenia, the capital city, which was now filled with soldiers as they were being stationed in various hotels of the city and in any places where people could be accommodated for a short period of time. The unrest continued to increase day by day until the president was compelled to make an announcement to address the rising anxiety of the citizens among whom the rumors were spreading that maybe they were preparing themselves for a war with Esperia and the soldiers were there to protect the city. During the announcement, the president assured that the soldiers were here temporarily to prepare themselves to go for further training in a classified location. Although this slightly helped calm down the citizens, some of them still thought of the speech as a diversionary tactic to avoid causing a panic, and as a result of this, people started panic buying things, in order to stockpile them in their houses in the worry that if a war were to break out there was a chance of the city would be imposed with a curfew. However, by the fourth day, Sunday of the same week, the soldiers continued arriving in the city. Their movements restarted with all of the buses carrying them and started heading to the same location, a small port. This caused the people who were still worried to finally let out a sigh of relief as they finally were able to believe that the president's announcement was not a diversionary tactic. "Holy Mother!" a soldier exclaimed in shock as he got off the bus at the port and witnessed more than 15 ships waiting for them. "Start moving and boarding the docked ship, we don't have much time to waste," shouted their commanding officer, forcing the dilly-dallying soldiers to start moving to the ships. The moment the ship was filled, it undocked itself and started making its way to the island. Soon after, its place was immediately taken by a new one which started boarding the newly arrived soldiers. Isperia, on the other hand, had interpreted Eden's militaries this movement as an escalation, or at least they showed it outside that was how they were perceiving it. As an escalation, and responded by sending more soldiers to the border. Despite the capital city which the soldiers were being sent to was more than hundreds of kilometers away from their nearest border with Isperia, it seemed like they were just looking for a justifiable reason to do such things, and now that they had found one, they were not going to let it go to waste. With the increase in number of soldiers on the border on the Isperia's side, they also brought with them heavy military machinery, including tanks, artillery, and rocket launchers. As on the water side of the border, the number of military vessels increased, outnumbering whatever Eden had brought with them on the border, wanting to make sure that if a fight does happen, Eden doesn't have any chance of winning the fight. These movements did not bode well with Eden's citizens, who had most of their products' prices increased due to the Isperia's actions. Blockading their products that would have normally been transported from Isperia's ports, the citizens were about to get fed up with their actions, but the only thing holding them back was their worry of not being able to win the war if the fight really broke up between the two of them, and hence, they started directing their anger by wanting to increase the power of their country. And thanks to that, the number of people joining the military had increased exponentially for that period of time, showing the citizens' enthusiasm for wanting their country to increase in power and not be bullied by their much smaller and only neighbor. Adding on this, Nova doubled down the feeling of patriotism among the people, ordering the AI in Gaia OS to start pushing things that would make people feel patriotic and angry at Isperia, increasing the number of people joining the military even more. This caused Athena's stoic expression to turn into a smile as she was in joy, knowing that she was getting a new batch of people to torture and strengthen for her master or father. PTFFFFFFFF, 50 pods were simultaneously opened, releasing a slight puffing sound along with smoke as the massive handles were rising, revealing bodies that looked more like what a human would have been able to make if they had the capabilities of customizing their bodies. Needles started coming out of their bodies as they were being retracted back inside the walls of the pods, which was followed by the soldiers opening their eyes after a few minutes as they remained lying there for a few seconds before they were able to move themselves into a seating position. As they raised their hands, they observed the changes that had taken place on their bodies, which looked the same as they had become as a result of the excruciating training which they had faced in the VR world. Realizing that they were finally released from that harrowing location and the brutal trainer who had made them sleep a total of only 35 hours in a whole month, which was immediately followed by endless battles with them being sent to different scenarios, fighting lengthier battles with more smarts enemies, and the more they won, the more technologically advanced their enemies became. This had reached a point where even their advanced tech seemed inadequate due to how advanced their enemies had become, knocking away all of the confidence they had thanks to their advanced weapons. However, despite that, their enemies' asses were continuously being kicked, earning themselves a losing streak that would make ISIS feel sorry for them. The only difference being the time it took for the enemy to lose each battle continued to increase every time as they had started using tactics and other means to try to reduce the disadvantage they found themselves being against. Getting off the pods, and despite their legs touching the ground for the first time in a week, they felt surprisingly energetic as they remembered what Athena had said about their body when they were logged in the simulation. She had told them that their body training would be reflected into their real-world counterpart. When they turned around and saw row after row of pods being lined, it sent goosebumps all over their body as they saw all of the pods were releasing a green light, except the ones in which they used to be were the only ones having its light red. They felt goosebumps as they realized that all of the thousands of pods that they could see continued to go on almost endlessly and were filled with occupants, meaning that their general was now providing training to more than a few thousand people, giving all of them the training which exceeded any training that any of special forces of any other country could receive without having to worry about any of them inuring or dying during the training, resulting in a great loss of investment. The only disadvantage is the time it takes to complete the training, they thought to themselves, knowing that they had spent more than 3 months and 2 weeks inside these pods while they were receiving their training.